Hi, everybody. Pastor Andrew here on the Wednesday after the 12th Sunday after Pentecost with another Wednesday word. This week, I'd like to talk about rocks and stones and faith. All those images come from the lectionary gospel for this past Sunday. And if you have been able to see our service, then you know that the sermon focused primarily on the reading from Paul's letter to the Romans. So I wanted to take a little bit and talk about the gospel reading and what significance it might have for us to reflect on this week as we continue to follow Jesus. The center of the reading that we heard on Sunday was this incredible confession of faith from Peter. Jesus asks the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter speaks up and says, "You are the Messiah, or the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus responds, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of John, for flesh and blood have not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." When we hear this passage, we tend to think about the rock that Jesus is talking about as a really large, formidable thing, a boulder or a cornerstone, the sort of thing that's substantial enough to build something permanent and enduring on. But in the original Greek that underlies this, there's actually a really fun word play. The name Peter in English comes from the Greek word Petros, which means rock. And in this sentence where Jesus says, "You are Peter, Petros, on this rock I will build my church," he also uses the word Petra. "You are Petros, and on this Petra I will build my church." Now that might just sound nerdy, but I promise there's a reason for looking at this. You see, in the Greek of the time, that substantial rock was the word Petra, the one that Jesus uses to describe the rock on which the church will be built. But he equates that rock, that large boulder, with Peter, Petros, a word that was usually used in the standard Greek of the time to refer to pebbles or small stones. So there's not just a word play, but I think possibly a profound statement about how our faith becomes the faith on which the church is built, and how, contrary to our idea that the kind of faith that builds the church has to be this massive, substantial thing, the example of Peter is as someone who has little faith, whose contribution is maybe smaller than we realize, but who nevertheless becomes one of those people on whom the church is built. I don't know about you, but that's a comforting thought to me. I don't always consider my faith in God or in Christ to be massive and solid and substantial. Particularly when tough things are going on, when I'm struggling in my life with a particular challenge, when I see the brokenness and the pain and fear and sadness in the world, sometimes it's more difficult to muster up the kind of solid, reliable faith that I think I should have. But I have a kindred spirit in Peter, the stone or pebble, who nevertheless receives this gift of revelation and makes the confession on which the church stands. It gives me hope that even when my faith feels small, it's nevertheless important enough to God. It's nevertheless something that God can use to build something that's more substantial than my contribution. Peter really is a model for all of us, the one who tries really hard to get it all right, the one who sometimes has those moments of inspiration and says something wiser than he would normally be able to say. And yes, the one who has some moments of radical, abundant trust in God, but who also stumbles and falls, as in the reading that we'll get this next Sunday. Jesus describes how he's going to be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and on the third day rise again, and that this is how his life is supposed to go, that this is what his life looks like under God's will and God's plan. And Peter rebukes him and says, "By no means, Lord, this can never happen to you." Peter goes from that rock-solid confession of faith to becoming, in Jesus' words, a stumbling block, a cause for failure, because he has his mind set on his own ideas and not on the things of God. I'm more like Peter than I'd like to admit. And I'm more often like Peter in that second story, the one who's convinced that I know how things are supposed to go. The good news is that despite our sometimes having a lack of faith, despite the fact that our faith can sometimes feel wobbly and small, it's nevertheless that confession that Christ is Lord, the Son of the living God, on which the church, the gathering of the faithful, this community of believers that spans time and space, it's on that confession, on that rock, that the church is built. And it's in Christ's faithfulness that it stands and falls. Whether your faith today feels like a massive boulder or like a tiny pebble, know this: Christ is with you. You have the Spirit of God dwelling within you. God has called you and claimed you to be one of Christ's followers. And because of the faithfulness of Jesus, we know that even when our faith is small, God's faithfulness is greater than we could ever ask or imagine. And in Christ, we have the ability to be so much more than we could be on our own. I pray that you're blessed by the example of Peter, who, though he stumbles and falls, is never forgotten, who is restored to relationship, and who continues to, throughout the ages, proclaim that confession: you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, alongside each one of us. Thanks be to God for this incredible gift. See you again next week.